My aim around climate is to not need a central climate team. The characteristics for people in this industry is curiosity. I now lead our global energy and power business, as well as leading our global climate and sustainability strategy. Because of the tariffs, I think we need to be able to support our clients to manage volatility.
Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process.
Thank you for joining me on Brick by Brick. I'm excited to talk to you about, you've done lots of conversations here at Riskworld. Why don't you start about how did you end up in your current position? What's a little bit about your history? I like to talk about that because a lot of people, their way to the insurance industry is very unique and it doesn't always follow a direct line. So
I think that's absolutely right. And especially for people of my generation, we haven't necessarily seen as insurance as a career path. Many people in my generation fell into it, and I'm one of those. So I was working as an environmental consultant and was moving geography and needed a job and saw a job at Marsh advertised for an environmental insurance broker. So it was, I think, a path that's familiar to many, needed a job. It was the right place to land and never looked back since.
what's kept you in the insurance industry? What's exciting about it to you?
The fact that there is so much opportunity. So from that first entry-level job that I had over 20 years ago, I've held a number of roles. I've held geographical roles. I've held global roles. I now lead our global energy and power business, as well as leading our climate and sustainability strategy. And there's just been so much opportunity to learn new things, work with different people, with complex clients, always challenging. And I'm always being asked questions I don't know the answer to, which I love.
One of the characteristics that most people say that it takes to be successful in insurance is curiosity, right? And that there's many different ways to look at it because it is a business. It is about protection. It is about all of these things. And the intersection of business and mitigating risk is a very interesting, curious place to find yourself. Let's talk about what's your strategy in 2025 right now for climate. Let's talk about what some of your strategies are.
So I've said for a long time that my aim around climate is to not need a central climate team, because thinking about extreme weather and how extreme weather is changing should just be the way people do things around here. It should just be embedded as all of our colleagues think about risk. You don't need to understand, you don't need to have a degree in physics or meteorology to know that we're experiencing more extreme weather and that we need to be able to respond to that. So two sides of the house. One side of the house is how are businesses decarbonizing? For many businesses, we talked about construction, we talked about building materials. They're going to be using new building material. Do we have the right insurances available to cope with those technologies? Can insurance cope with low carbon cement? How's it thinking about mass timber? Or it might be new fuels for marine vessels. How do insurances need to evolve? That's on one side of the house. And then on the other side of the house is for every single business that has assets or people, how do we cope with extreme weather? How do we cope with the impacts of that weather? Now, it can be where insurance typically comes in, which is thinking about damage. So thinking about flooding and wind and hail, and how does insurance respond? We also need to think about the people risk, because climate change is causing more health issues. It might be extreme heat, causing illness, causing respiratory problems. It could be floods. It could be changes in the climate, meaning that we have more vector-borne diseases. We have more malaria and other things. And then there also, do we still have access to the same resources? So if you are using a lot of water in your manufacturing processes, do you still have access to water to make your fizzy drink or to grow your crops? So my ambition, you said, what's my ambition for 2025? I think is a little bit ambitious to say I'll get it done this year, but is to have all of my colleagues in the insurance industry owning those issues. And when they're bringing their curiosity to challenges, they're thinking, how does insurance need to adapt to cope with this new risk? And how do I need to be advising my clients so their assets remain economically insurable into the future?
Yeah, one thing that, when you were speaking that made me really curious is how do you move legacy industry that is slow to adopt these things? Like you said, I totally agree. It's just something you have to consider doing business now.
Yeah.
And it would be irresponsible not to have it be part of your normal workflow. Yeah, I talk to risk managers all the time. They're not even just climate, but cyber, climate, AI. They're like, my job is way more complicated than it ever was before.
And isn't that cool?
Yeah, isn't that cool? Okay.
That's where I come
Welcome
from.
welcome to the bigger table, right?
Yeah.
Your role has become elevated.
It's spot on. And you said that one of the characteristics for people in this industry is curiosity. I would say curiosity and collaboration, because the skills that we have as risk and insurance professionals is that we need to be able to cover, we need to understand the entirety of the business. And increasingly, we need to be connectors. We've probably been connecting with the health and safety folk for a long time. We've probably been connecting with the asset folks. We need to connect with the HR folk. We need to be understanding how they're thinking about their people strategies. We need to be talking to the the technology officers to understand the data risk. So yes, I completely agree. And how cool is that?
Yeah, how cool is that? The next thing that they would say to me is, great, the people in construction, let's use construction as an example, the access I have to tradespeople are in particular materials, in particular this, how am I going to be sustaining my business when margins are thinner than ever, but gaining new skills that are going to make me competitive to the new world? What's a strategy? How do we navigate that place?
I think the start point with so much of this is having a clear return on investment. That if we understand that clients, and I'm talking about construction clients are expecting to be able to build buildings in new ways. They want different performance standards for their buildings. So you may be able to tell from my accent that I'm based in London, and landlords who have legacy buildings that don't meet environmental standards, they can't achieve the same levels of rent. They don't have the same occupancy levels. So kind of you start to be able to build the business case that if we want to stay relevant, every single business is having to evolve and invest for the future all the time for various different reasons. And so by understanding how your demand signal is going to change and different things are going to be prioritized, it provides you the stimulus to evolve your business, because businesses are evolving all of the time. And this is just another reason for that evolution.
You're absolutely right. So let's take that. So we talked about the environmental thing. That's a thing that people are concerned about. Their margins are getting hit. They want to do better work, but they view it as an extra ad. It's not. Now let's take the tariff piece, because you were doing a conversation on tariff. That's another thing that's coming up constantly about materials. What's your foresight look like around that?
So to give people foresight, we've actually built a tariff simulator. So Marsh developed a supply chain capability called Centris, which we launched at RIMS last year, that provides visibility to people to not just their tier one, their immediate suppliers, but their suppliers, their suppliers. So tier one, tier two, tier three, and beyond of the supply chain. Once you have that visibility, we plug in the tariff simulator, and the tariff simulator allows our clients to understand how they may be affected by tariffs. But one of the really important use cases that one of the clients came up with is it allows them to challenge cost increases. So let me give you an example, and this may not be the area that risk managers feel responsible for, but if you as a supplier would say to me, look, I've got to put my prices up by 10% because of tariffs. At the moment, I have no way of challenging that. Using this tariff simulator, I can understand the supply chain that sits behind you, and I can see that actually the composite impact of your supply chain, you should only be giving me a 3.2% increase. So now I have the ability to negotiate. So that's one of the conversations that we're having. When you bring it back more specifically to the risk manager, we're starting to think about claims. How are claims going to be impacted? And if claims are impacted, do you have the right limits? Do you have the right indemnity periods? Because supply chains could get extensions. There could be challenges on getting the materials that you need. If you've got ongoing claims, are you contemplating the tariffs that may be imposed on that rebuild? Yeah. And so is your adjuster setting the expected loss at the right level? So there are a number of different areas where it's intersecting.
Do you think who wins from, like, say, Marsh or all of those players are the ones that don't just increase premiums, but can also back that up with things like the simulator and also build new, smarter insurance programs? Like, do you think what is our obligation in the industry to meet that demand?
So because of the tariffs, I think we need to be able to support our clients to manage volatility. Business leaders have never had to manage through so much complexity. And I was a little bit glib when I said how cool. I think some of us would prefer a bit less complexity in our lives sometimes, but business leaders have never had to manage through so much complexity, which means that there are more sources of volatility for the business.
Yes.
Which means actually insurance becomes more important because we can take out that volatility.
Round off the edges.
Exactly. So the winners are the people that can provide you with the insights to understand what's driving the volatility, to minimize the cost of containing the volatility. And so tools like the tariff simulator help do exactly that.
Yeah. One thing I also noticed is that a lot of the people I talk to on the podcast about climate change are from the UK. Is there like a secret cabal of people interested in this in the UK? Like, and what's the impact not being from America, trying to work with American businesses on this subject? Are we open to it?
If I take the second part of the question first, working with American businesses on climate change, if we think about climate change as both of those things, there's how do we decarbonize business? Now, that's often quite politically charged because there are costs involved. Who picks up those costs? A molecule of carbon dioxide released in the US is the same as a molecule of carbon dioxide released in China. So who has responsibility for that reduction? And so that becomes a politically charged conversation. I don't find any pushback, any politicization of the fact that we're having to deal with more extreme weather because everybody's feeling it. They can see it on the news. And so people wanting to make sure that their businesses are resilient is not a political topic. So I don't have any challenges anywhere in the world talking about that topic. The challenge is how do we fund it? Because most people don't have this pile of CapEx that's sitting there just to address one thing. So one of the things I think that is really important is helping our clients recognize that, okay, if we're deploying CapEx anyway, let's do it in a climate smart way. Let's make sure that we're using low carbon if we can, but making sure that those dollars are being spelt in a climate resilient way so we're able to resist the floods, the wind, the intense heat, whatever that is to come.
One thing that you were also talking about is how exciting that we have these opportunities. You said it was glib, but I want to say, I think that more than ever before in the history of my career, the types of businesses that are going to be successful are the ones where the leadership are great operators, because there's operational challenges all over the place. How has the risk managers in your 20 plus years career, how have they matured? And if you were talking to a risk manager, which you are, what would you say is some things that they should continue to push themselves on?
So if we state my career, I've seen the quality of risk managers improve exponentially, and having, we said earlier, it's more of a seat at the table, that it's no longer that insurance was a department that you were sort of sent to. It's now a destination. People realize they're addressing really complex risk issues and they're part of the financial security of the organization. They make the entire financial system work by providing that financial resilience. So actually, I think insurance professionals and risk managers have really stepped up to the challenge of being a far more integral part of the business, of the overall operations.
Do you think that's because risk managers have moved from being under like safety and things like that only into reporting to the CFO, and like corporate structures have had an impact on that? Is it just because it's harder to operate a business? From your perspective, is it everything that I'm saying is why that's happened? Like,
I think it's because insurance is seen as one of a suite of financial instruments. You have your revolver, you have credit facilities, you have all of those things. How do I make sure that I have that financial instrument ready to make my business be resilient? I also think that we've got much better at leveraging the data. So insurance buyers, risk managers have access to really good data that can provide the insights to improve the operational performance that we just said was a differentiator in business. So I think there's a recognition, either, I'm not quite sure if it's risk managers and insurers have been proactive in saying, like, we've got these tools that can help run the business, or the business has been looking for help and they've said, hey guys, step up to the plate. I'm not quite sure which force it was, but I think the result is that risk managers now have a seat at the table because they have tools, they have experience, and they have an ability to support businesses to thrive.
this is a complicated question. So when you think about building new programs for insurance, and all insurance has been based on historics, and now we're in a place where maybe that doesn't make as much sense, is that conversation with internal teams conflicting, or is everyone kind of aware that this is a shift that the insurance industry needs to make to more real-time data, to trusting these data sources, to building new programs with new models that you guys have never had before? What's kind of the feeling in the room?
The awareness that you talk about is absolutely there. Being aware doesn't make it easy to solve.
So we're still in the problem-solving phase.
Still in the problem-solving phase. Now, there's kind of one school of thought that there's kind of like nothing new. There are some new technologies, but often it's, I don't know if you're familiar with like recombinant technology, that most things are recombinant. And so how do we disaggregate that? I'm so sorry for using this vocabulary and sounding like I'm speaking in jargon, but if most things are just existing stuff brought together in new ways, how do we mine those disparate data sets to create a perspective?
To build an insight that is
exactly
new or fresh.
Or could be that like we've been doing something at a relatively modest scale and we're now doing that at hyperscale. And so how does the risks translate? We don't have a perfect answer for how insurers who like to have large data set, likes to have a rearview mirror to look in on performance, how do we get through that challenge? And so that's a big part of when I said that on the climate space, we look in two ways. We look at how do you cope with the extreme weather that we're experiencing, and then how do insurances need to evolve? That's a big issue that we need to unpack. And then who are the custodians and the owners of those data sets?
You're right.
The DOE in the US, Department of Energy, has some really large data sets that they're open to sharing. But how do we do that in a way so that the insurance premiums that are charged for the new risk areas aren't crazy high because there's so much uncertainty? We know that there's a price for the risk, but we're seeing not just the price for the risk, but loaded with an uncertainty premium as well. And we want to try and contain that uncertainty premium as much as possible. I know that's not a good answer. There isn't a silver bullet.
I think it's an honest answer,
really hard.
and I appreciate it. Like, what I want people who are listening to the podcast to know is, where are the conversations happening now that they should be aware are happening? And where is it business as normal? And where should they be really thinking, hey, 5 years from now, how we solve this problem may look completely different? We have a lot of people in university who listen to the podcast. What's a piece of advice you would give to someone who is entering into the industry today?
So it's kind of building on where you started, which is curiosity. Don't think that there is a big they out there that has all of the bright ideas. We need everyone to own the issues and to lean in. So don't assume that there is some puppet master who has a master plan that's directing things. Step up. If you see problems, lean in, figure out how to fix them, be curious, and be proud of the industry that you're in because there's so much we can achieve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to trustlayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.